Trying. Okay, we are starting into lesson 4.6 today. Lesson 4.6, it's the front and the back. We're going to start it today. We will finish it tomorrow. Okay? The homework will be due on Friday. So lesson 4.6 will be out there and available for you to go ahead and start tonight, but it won't be due till Friday. Okay? So we are looking at another way to solve quadratic equations. If you remember, it wasn't on the quiz, but before we took the quiz, we did lesson 4.5. If you flip back and look, lesson 4.5 was solving quadratic equations with another method. It was solving quadratic equations using factoring. Okay, so now we're going to learn something called completing the square. This is where we come into the issue of, can everything factor? And not everything can factor. And so we're going to learn some other methods. This lesson is completing the square. The next lesson will be quadratic formula. So, you know, all different things there. Well, I'll be honest, I'm not sure completing the square is taught here in Algebra 1, because I don't think it's required to be taught in Algebra 1. Not the okay. Okay. Focus. Okay. We're going to start before we actually get to a full out completing the square, which I hope to get to at the bottom of the page by today. We're going to start with just some basic solving using square roots. Now, this first row is technically something you could have very easily done in Algebra 1, but trying to solve something such as 4x squared plus 10 equals 46. Note the typo. No. Okay.
Confident.
So
when you're like 46, it's like.
Okay. 4x squared plus 10 equals 46. Thoughts on how you would solve for x here? I do not want to make it equal to 0 in this case. Well, and I guess technically we could make it equal to 0, and depending on the problem in this top row, then try factoring. But I'm wanting to get away from factoring.
So that's going to be my answer. Divide by 2.
So you end up with 2 different square roots. If you subtract the 10 and we get 36, you'll have a 2x, 2 and a 6. Because those are the square roots of each.
Okay, I'm going to tweak your direction slightly a little bit, but let's start with this equation only has an x squared, correct? There's no actual x. Okay, the other ones we were factoring usually had an x squared, an x, and a number term. But this only has an x squared. So think about it first of, how do I get x squared by itself? And if it's 4x squared plus 10, the first thing you're going to want to do is to subtract 10. If you subtract 10 on the left, you're going to subtract 10 on the right. So then, 10 minus 10 cancels, and I have 4x squared equals 36. Now, this is where I said I'm going to tweak, because you guys were talking about square roots right now. Hold that thought. Is x squared by itself? Okay, my recommendation, not saying you'd have to, but my recommendation is let's finish getting the x squared by itself. So if it's 4 times x squared, how do you separate 4 times x squared? You divide by 4. If we divide by 4 on the left, we divide by 4 on the right. So then we end up with what equation? X squared equals 9. Now, if x squared equals 9, because 36 divided by 4 is 9, what's my next step? Okay, so right here, the question is, how do we get from x squared to x? And the key there is to square root. And I'm going to say, if we square root the left, you always want to square root the right, right? What you do to one side, you do to the other. Okay. Now, the square root of x squared is what? X. Because x times x is x squared. The square root of 9.
3. I was like, I can't square it if you get 6. What's
3 and
3. Negative 3.
negative 3.
I said it first.
Because think about, what does it mean to be a square root? If it's a square root, it's a number.
That is positive or negative.
Well, but how do we think square root? It's a number times itself to get that number, right? So when we say square root of 9, the obvious answer is 3 times 3 is 9. So we say 3. But what you always hear me say is, in an equation setting, you have to consider both the positive and the negative. And negative 3 times negative 3 is also positive 9. Now, you could write it like I did, as 3 comma negative 3. You could also write it as x equals plus or minus 3, if you want. I will accept either or. I don't care if you write 3 and negative 3, or if you write plus or minus 3. Math Excel, I think, will accept either or, because you'll have some plus or minus solutions in homework. You should see in the toolbar on Math Excel a plus or minus option. Now, I say should. I know the iPads make everything weird, so hopefully it'll be there. I know, and so hopefully you'll be able to find the plus or minus. I know sometimes it will still let you do like 3 comma negative 3 instead. It might require the plus or minus sometimes, so. Okay. Questions there? Okay, so this is solving using square roots. Okay, so, and we're going to write down some steps here as we go on this one, but let's look at part B and make sure we know what we're doing. 3x squared minus 5 equals 25. What was our first goal?
Oh, that's probably what I did wrong. That's subtraction 5.
Okay. What'd you say, Natalie? I think you...
Make the left side by itself.
Okay, and not even just the left side by itself, but specifically the x squared by itself, right? So make your first job to isolate the x squared term. So I'm kind of writing a step up here if you are someone that you like to have some steps. But step 1 is to isolate the x squared term. So in this case, if it's 3x squared minus 5, the first thing I'm going to do is add 5. If we add 5 on the left, we add 5 on the right. And so now I have 3x squared equals 30. What's next? Okay, we're still trying to isolate x squared. So if it's 3 times x squared, divide by 3. And so now I have x squared equals 10. Have I isolated my x squared?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, what's the next step? Okay, so officially the next step is to square root. If it's x squared, how do you get x squared to become x? You take the square root. If we take the square root of the left, you take the square root of the right. Now, what is the square root of x squared? X. What is the square root of 10? Not the answer I want. What's the square root of 10? You're way too difficult. No. Don't use a calculator. Square root of 10 is square root of 10. And Negative square root of 10. So,
You have to think
plus or minus. Okay. So, x is plus or minus square root of 10. Yes, it's okay. Actually, it's preferred. It's required that you leave your answer as square root of 10. If you try and say 3 point whatever this one is, Math Excel will count you wrong. I will probably count you wrong because I want you to just say square root of 10 and negative square root of 10. So plus or minus square root of 10. Now, and I will tell you, it came up this morning. So I think it's not till second semester, but we have a chapter coming up that is all square roots, where we have to go back and learn how to simplify radicals and whatnot. So. No, we're not dropping out because you guys need this to graduate. So. Okay. Now, okay, hey guys, come on. Let's get focused. Are we ready to go for C then? Okay. 7x squared minus 10 equals 25. Okay, to get x squared by itself, Jamison says we're going to add 10. So then I end up with the equation 7x squared equals 35. Is x squared by itself yet? No, so I'm going to divide by 7? No one's saying it. So we divide by 7. X squared is 5. And how do we find actual x? You take the square root. And the square root of 5? Just square root of 5. Don't forget to put the plus or minus out front. Okay? So this is one of those lessons where Math Excel is not going to want decimals. Period, end of statement. Okay? Okay. Real quick, I don't know that we probably, you guys have this top row mastered, but let's just go ahead and complete D. It won't take long. If it's 2x squared plus 9 equals 13, what'd you do first? If it's 2x squared plus 9, we're going to do the opposite and subtract 9. So then 2x squared equals 4. If it's 2x squared equals 4, to move that 2, I'm going to divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 cancels. I have x squared equals 2. And final step always to get from x squared to x, take the square root. Square root of 2 and negative square root of 2. Don't forget that plus or minus. Math Excel will flat out count you wrong. I will take at least a point off on a quiz or a test if you forget the plus or minus. So you've got to remember, keep in mind, these are x squared equations, right? Quadratic equations. All of these things in this chapter have 2 answers. Okay, so just get used to it, that everything has 2 answers. In this case, it's plus answer and a minus answer.
Oh yeah, which one is so easy?
What now?
Setting it up because we had to set it to 0 last time.
That was to factor. We're not doing that.
Oh, we don't have to set anything to 0?
Not today. When we get back to quadratic formula. But okay, example 2. So we're going to kind of take some of the steps we've been using and kind of add in a little bit. And that's kind of what we do in this lesson, is just kind of keep, growing the problem a little bit. And again, technically, a lot of these problems could be solved by setting your equation equal to 0 and factoring like we did in the last lesson. But they can't all. Okay? And so this is why we're learning this method that, we don't always do it. In this case, I'll be honest. Could you possibly, this particular equation, set it equal to 0 and factor and get it correct? You could. But you're missing out on the method that I need you to learn that leads into completing the square. So, Jameson, listen. I'm teaching. What do you think? Thank you. Okay. On this one, notice it's solving a perfect square trinomial equation. Keep in mind, we were just taking square roots. The way these are set up right here, your first job is to factor the left side as is. Okay, factor the left side as is. So I'm going to move it over here for the moment. And I want you guys to think about factoring this. X squared plus 4x plus 4. How do we factor that? Can we go back to the whole 2 parenthesis thing?
Yeah.
We didn't set the equation equals 0, but we're just factoring this side. What do you know? X squared breaks into x times x. What do you know about the numbers? We need 2 numbers that multiply to be 4 and add to be 4. What multiplies to be 4 and adds to be 4? 2 times 2. If they multiply to be positive and add to be positive. Both positive. X plus 2 times x plus 2. Or, how could that be written? Oh, good. You guys remember. X plus 2 quantity squared. We're going to do a lot of that factoring into a perfect square. The shortcut you could have done here is the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 4 is 2. And take the middle sign of the b term. Okay? That still works. It's a perfect square trinomial. Now, let me rake this up over here and look at what we have. X plus 2 quantity squared equals 25. I factored the left side. And this is the equation I have. What do you notice about both sides?
You can square root.
You can square root them? Okay. Both sides are perfect squares. And that's the whole design of this problem, is that both sides are perfect squares. I don't have to explain to anyone that 25 is a perfect square. And even if it wasn't a perfect square, we could still use this method, but it works here. X plus 2 quantity squared is a perfect square because it's x plus 2 times itself, x plus 2. So since both sides are perfect squares, we're going to, what were we doing up above? No. To get from x squared to x, we were taking the square root. We're going to take the square root. If you take the square root of the left, you take the square root of the right. Now, think with me. X plus 2 quantity squared. What happens when you square root x plus 2 squared? Just becomes x plus 2. Because when you square root something that has a square, what do the square root and the square do? They essentially cancel each other out, leaving us with whatever's under the parenthesis. Which what's under the parenthesis here is x plus 2. What's the square root of 25? 5 and negative 5. Or what I just wrote is plus or minus 5. Again, when you take a square root in an equation setting, you have to account for the positive and negative option. On the x plus 2, we didn't, because you only have to do it on one side. So we're going to do it on the number side, which is what we put on the 5. No, because once on the first part, once I square rooted the x plus 2 quantity squared, the squared is gone, and so you don't need the parentheses. And what do you think the final step here is? Yeah, now, what are we, if we're trying to solve for x, we're going to subtract 2. What am I going to be subtracting 2 from?
Positive and negative 5.
Positive 5 and negative 5. Meaning I'm going to have how many answers again? 2. Now, if you are fine with just doing that and writing your answers, that's fine. Just in case anyone wants it or looks at it later, If it's helpful, you could write it as x plus 2 equals 5 and x plus 2 equals negative 5. If that visual helps you, you can use that. And again, as we said, if it's x plus 2, I'm going to subtract 2. And so what do my answers end up being? 3 and negative 7. I wrote mine as x equals 3 or x equals negative 7. Math Excel is probably, just commas is fine. X equals 3, comma negative 7 would work as well. Obviously, I can't use a plus or minus on this answer because they ended up 2 different answers. Yes, there are other ways to do this problem. Yes, you have to know this method because it leads into completing the square.
If this is like an option, do I have to do that?
If the directions say that they want you to use the perfect square, the square method, then you have to do this.
That's what I'm trying to ask. So like the first part of this one, we always factor the left side first.
Yes. And actually, I was going to write, we factored the left.
Do we always get
What did we do after we factored the left?
square root?
We square rooted both sides, right? And after we square rooted both sides, we solve for x. There are certain problems that you can't use the regular factoring on. I get it. If you could have used the regular factoring on this one, if you made it equal to 0 and whatnot. I'm not arguing that fact. However, I'm trying to teach a new method here, and it's important that we get an idea of how this new method works going into completing the square, which is a definite necessary method. Okay?
Instead, I suppose like your 2 to 5 or 5 other answers will never be the same.
Yeah.
In this one,
Or just any of them really.
Because if they were
Like
both like
the-
5 and negative 5, they both end up being 2 different answers.
yeah, I'm not sure that they would. I know, I'm trying to think that through.
Like I'm trying to think of a number where
Well,
like you could end up just being that one number.
yeah. If you had 0 on the right side, it could. Because the square root of 0 would be 0 and, Well, no, you just end up with one answer there, so I don't know. Okay, moving along. My goal is to finish this page today. We may or may not quite make it. Hopefully we will. Okay. What are the solutions of the quadratic equation? Let's try the method I just taught. What did we do first? Factor the left, right? Our steps are up above. So, if you want to move it over to the side, you can. X squared minus 14x plus 49. What do you know about factoring that? Two parentheses if you want. X squared breaks into x and x. What multiplies to be 49 and adds to be negative 14? Negative 7 and negative 7? Or, what's the square root of 49? 7, right? And the middle sign here makes it negative. So, my parentheses end up being x minus 7, or x minus 7 squared. So, write that on your left side. X minus 7, quantity squared, equals 25.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of where those factors will always be the same like that.
Oh, these factors?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And what we're doing right here, these factors would have to be the same.
I was talking
Yeah.
about that too. But
Okay.
Where I was trying to-
What's my next step?
square root, square root.
Square root. X minus 7, quantity squared, the square root of it. Just x minus 7, whatever's under the bracket. Square root of 25. 5 and negative 5. Or what I'm going to write as plus or minus 5. And finally, after we square root, how do I solve for x? Yeah, you're going to add 7. And remember, how many answers am I going to have? 2 answers. Because you're solving x minus 7 equals 5, and x minus 7 equals negative 5. So add 7 in both cases. And what solutions do you get? I've already wrote it down, but someone correct them.
Oh, 12.
So how do you guys get 13?
I was waiting for someone to correct them.
Oh.
Reese said 13. Jameson right along with it. I'd honestly already written 12.
You also have 13 and negative 2.
Yes, I did.
Oh.
Okay.
Jameson just want to fact check me.
5 plus 7 is 12. Negative 5 plus 7 is 2. Not even going to deal with the elementary math fact issue here. Okay. Moving along. That leads us directly into completing the square. Now, please listen. We're going to look at these steps here. Now, first of all, one more typo. This is supposed to say x squared plus bx equals c. So as we look at these steps, rewrite the equation in the form x squared plus bx equals c. Now, notice what is in front of x squared. Not 0, 1. In other words, is there any other number allowed there? Does it say ax squared? No, it just says x squared, so it's only allowed to be a 1x squared. Step 2, which is also a new step. You're going to complete the square by adding b over 2 squared to each side of the equation. Now, I'll walk you through that step. You'll get it. We'll practice it. Notice what step 3 is. It's factor the left. Didn't we just do that up above? Step 4, square root both sides. Didn't I just do that up above? And step 5, solve for x. Didn't I just do that up above? I did. So my point is, you've already done steps 3, 4, and 5. We're going to use steps 1 and 2 to get our equation to look like what the above equations did. Now, give me a chance. I promise. I will make this make sense. Okay. So, let's look at example 3 down here. First step. Rewrite the equation in the form x squared plus bx equals c. So right now, we have x squared and x and c all on the same side. So first things first, how do I move that 6? Subtract it. So then I'm going to have the equation 3x squared minus 12x equals negative 6. Am I in the form x squared plus bx equals c? Not fully. Good answer. Why am I not fully in that form? Because of 3. It's supposed to be a 1x squared. How do I make a 3x squared become just a plain x squared? Divide by 3. Because if it's 3 times x squared, we divide by 3. Now, if I'm going to divide that first term by 3, we can divide it all by 3. So then this becomes x squared minus 4x, I'm going to leave a gap, equals negative 2. I'm just hinting that I'm leaving a gap. Okay, now have I completed step 1? X squared plus bx equals c. 1x squared plus bx equals c. That's what step 1 is. And we'll review this again tomorrow. Okay, but work to understand what I'm doing here. Step 2. This is our new step, or really new step. Complete the square. This is actually where we're completing the square by adding b over 2 quantity squared to each side of the equation. Hold on. First of all, what is b? Okay, we're using so we're using our current b here, yes? Don't go back to the original. Use your current. So b is negative 4. Can we agree there? Now it says to do b over 2 quantity squared. What is b? Negative 4. So that means I'm going to do negative 4 divided by 2 quantity squared. What is negative 4 divided by 2? Negative 2. What is negative 2 quantity squared? Positive 4. What do I do with that positive 4? We add it to both sides of the equation. So we just found b over 2 quantity squared value to be 4. We're going to add it to both sides of the equation. Thus, when I said I'm leaving a gap earlier, guess what? That's where I'm putting my plus 4. And if I add it on the left, we got to add 4 on the right. Okay? That's step 2. Step 3, 4, and 5 is exactly what we just did up above. So, step 3, it says factor the left side. Now I know it says into x plus b over 2 squared. Don't stress about that. We're factoring the left side. When you factor, it will always be a parenthesis square. How does x squared break? X squared is x times x, or in other words, the square root of x squared is x. What about 4? The square root of 4 is 2. If this middle sign is a minus 4, this is going to be a minus 2. Now, if you don't like what I just did there, can you write out your 2 parentheses and do product and sum?
Yes.
You can. And guess what? They're always going to end up being the same numbers. And that's always, in this case, negative 2, negative 2. Clean up the right. What is negative 2 plus 4? 2. So right there, I just factored the left and did a minor cleanup on the right. But okay, so the b over 2. Officially, if you look back over here, b over 2 is what's inside right here. Negative 4 over 2. Negative 4 over 2 simplified to be negative 2. So this number right here, this negative 2, is the same as this negative 2 and will always be the same as that negative 2. That's another way to look at this.
So you can really just skip it.
I mean, you could factor in a different way, thinking about it, yeah.
So that is basically your answer.
Yeah, so
for
you
two
do
different parts.
So if
Uh-huh.
you do the negative, it's a negative 2, you could just skip all that and go x minus 2. Essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
No, because you have to have the plus 4 here, because you have to have this plus 4 to get this correct value. So don't skip that. Okay? Okay, caught up on questions for the moment?
Yes.
That was step 3. I factored the left. Step 4, square root both sides. Haven't we been doing this all period?
Yeah.
Square root both sides. So square root the left, square root the right. What's the square root of x minus 2 quantity squared? X minus 2, whatever's under the radical, right? What's the square root of 2? Positive and negative square root of 2. Don't forget the plus or minus. Step 5. Solve for x. So if it's x minus 2, you add 2. If you add 2 on the left, you add 2 on the right. Now, when I give this answer, plus or minus radical 2, we're going to leave that as radical 2. What's nicest to put this is to put your plus or minus in the middle of your answer. So I'm going to bring this positive 2 out front and say 2 plus or minus radical 2. If you could take the square root of whatever that 2 is, then you would need to add and subtract these numbers and get 2 actual answers. Now, here's the question. Do I have 2 answers right here? 2 plus radical 2 and 2 minus radical 2. So I have 2 answers. It's just in this case, I couldn't actually take the square root of 2, so I left it in square root form. Sometimes you'll be able to, sometimes you can't. Okay? Tomorrow, we will come back and we will pick up on the back side of the notes. And we're going to start right off with completing the square. We've got 2 of them to practice, and then we've got a little bit of vertex form to look at. Okay?
The one we just did.
Yes, that was actually completing the square.
Because that was a lot easier than what
Yeah, you have done your first completing the square problem.
it was like the triple value thing. That was only pretty. I think we I hated it. It wasn't as fun as what we thought, but it was very long.
Have a good day, guys.
Hey.